Welcome back, and today what we're going to be talking about is how to check the contact surfaces on the back of your bolt lugs and how they interface with the corresponding receiver lugs on the receiver. Okay, these 2 points here. Now this check is very critical for a safe functioning M14 clone or an M1A. What that ensures is that pressure is being evenly distributed on the bolt lugs and on the receiver support when your round is fired. Now, too much stress on one side is going to stress that one lug too much and the other one not enough, and that can potentially lead your bolt to fail and break when you fire a round, which can be very, very dangerous. Okay, what you're going to need is you're going to need to strip down your bolt, okay, remove the extractor, the ejector, the firing pin, and the extractor plunger. Now a note on Springfield Armory rifles, the extractor that they provide has a dimple that has a deeper cutout than a GI extractor, so when you strip your bolt, be very careful. You actually are most likely going to shear off the leg of the extractor plunger. Okay, so what I want to show you is give you an example of the depth that they cut this dimple out. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put this plunger into the extractor, and you can see that the plunger completely disappears into the first spring, to the first coil of the spring. Now compare that with a GI extractor, which has a much shallower dimple, and you'll see that the extractor plunger has room to actually pop out, and this is the way it was designed, so they can actually be removed for maintenance. Now the Springfield Armory extractors, there is a benefit to having this, is you're much less likely to have an extractor fly out when you're firing, which I've had happen to me before. However, the drawback is it's very difficult to remove this extractor without actually breaking the tail of the plunger, and in this case I actually did break it. This is one of my personal ones. So what you're going to need to get this procedure done is a set of Headspace gauges. These are somewhat optional. I like to have it. You're going to need a magic marker or some Dicam blue, a couple of different varieties of lapping compound, a 5/32 punch, your bolt completely stripped, and the hammer spring out of your trigger group, and also a sized .308 case, or one that's been fired out of your rifle. Go ahead and resize it and then cut it in half, but be very careful not to actually distort the case. Otherwise, when you shove it in your chamber, it's going to jam up in there and it's going to get stuck. So it needs to be sized, and go ahead and test it in the chamber before you actually put it in to make sure that it'll come out. Okay, and so we'll go ahead and get started with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get this this black marker, and we're going to blacken up the bolt lugs. Go ahead and blacken up the lugs. Okay. Make sure you get all the surfaces. Allow it to dry for a short time. So while we're letting the ink dry, we're going to go ahead and get the hammer spring out of your trigger group. Okay. I'm going to put the rest of the trigger group aside. So again, you only want the hammer spring. Now what you want to do before you actually start lapping anything, there's a couple of things you want to check for. You want to check your headspace, and you want to check for your bolt roller to make sure that it actually clears. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to verify that the bolt actually closes all the way, and that that bolt roller spins freely when pressure is applied. What that means is that the bolt is going to be allowed to close all the way on the receiver, and the bolt lugs will be fully engaged. Okay, now on a lot of Springfield Armory receivers, especially from the 90s, this relief cutout for the bolt roller wasn't deep enough, and what happened is the bolt wasn't actually allowed to close all the way. So if you go ahead and lap it, then you're not getting as much surface contact as you should be. Okay, so if you have the bolt roller impact on your rifle, go to my YouTube page and I'll show you how to fix that. Basically, you need about a 10 thousandths clearance between the roller and the surface of the receiver. Okay, so between the bottom of the roller and the surface of the receiver cutout, the spec is about 0.010 of an inch. Once you know that that's good, go ahead and check your headspace, because before we start lapping, you want to make sure your headspace isn't already long, because if it's long, you're going to have other issues as well. It's going to be unsafe. Okay, so we're going to pull the bolt back. One thing I forgot to mention is before you start taking headspace measurements, make sure you get some kind of a chamber mop or something, and make sure your chamber's clean before you actually start checking your headspace. Okay, just to make sure there's no junk in there and it gives you a false reading thinking that you have longer headspace when actually you have tighter headspace. So what I have here is I have a PTG headspace gauge, and this particular one is 1.632 inches. Okay, so we're going to slide that in there. Okay, we're going to gently close our bolt and see if it closes all the way. Okay, and this one here, it won't close all the way. I got a little bit of a gap, so I know it's a little bit longer, or a little bit shorter than 1.632. So we'll go ahead and we'll drop that headspace gauge out, and we'll try the next one. So what we have here is 1.631 headspace gauge. Now minimum spec is 1.630, and the maximum is 1.636. Okay, so that's the range between the go and the no-go. And you can get by with just those. However, it's nice if you have the full set and you can actually check your headspace. Now we're going to go ahead and look at this, and we're going to see that basically, yeah, it closes nearly all the way. I think if I put a little bit of pressure on it, it will. So I'm going to call this about 1.6305 or to 1.631. Okay, so we have good tight headspace on that, which means we have room to lap the bolt safely. And the other thing you want to do is make sure that you're not going to lap through the surface hardness of both the bolt and the receiver. So this is a good indication of how much material we're taking off. And typically you don't want to take off more than about 0.003 from each one, so that's be about 0.006 wiggle room on lapping area. So now what we're going to do is I got my case here with the hammer spring inserted, okay, and we're going to go ahead and push that in there. We're going to get the back half, and we're going to push that in. Okay, so we have our bolt lugs marked, and we're ready to verify contact again. Now in my previous video I had give you some misleading information. It was brought to my attention that something I was displaying was incorrect, so I'm here to correct that. And it's how you measure the contact, or how you rotate the bolt to measure the contact, and also how you lap the bolt. Okay, so we're going to put that in. Now what you don't want to do, which is what I did before, is I just shoved this rod in there, and I just shoved forward and rotated around, not really caring if I had drug the bolt along this corner right here. Okay, so what can happen is, say if this is a high spot right here at the very, very tip, but not on the bottom, as I drag my bolt up and down over that high spot, it's going to go ahead and take off all the marking that I had on the back of the bolt, and it's going to give me misleading information. It's going to make me think that I have more contact than I actually do. So now what we're going to do is, when you push forward, you want to go as forward as you can, and then rotate it, and then ease it back and let it get pressure on the receiver engagement lugs. Okay, so now we're gonna jam as far forward as possible and rotate, and now we're gonna let off pressure. Okay, so hopefully what we've done is we rotated it without dragging the bolt across the top of the bolt lug cutout. And now that when we do rotate it, we're only going to rotate it just a little bit, maybe like 50 thousandths or so, just a little bit. Okay, and this is going to give us a more true, more accurate representation of what kind of bolt lug contact we have. Okay, so you're just barely going to rotate it, just a little bit, a few times. What you can also do is look at this surface here from the bottom. Okay, and some gunsmiths like to do it from the bottom. Okay, they like to invert the rifle and look at the gap that they have there. Okay, and they just rotate it just a little bit. Okay, and to simulate a magazine insertion, you're going to go ahead and push in, because again, the guy who owns this rifle wants a magazine inserted. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to push in with my thumb and simulate a magazine, okay? Or, again, I can just put a magazine in. And you don't even need the operating rod guide there, the operating rod spring guide in place to do that. Okay, so we got that in there, and we're just going to gently rotate it back and forth. And this is harder to do when you're trying to make a video than it is to just have everything resting on a bench. So you're just barely going to rotate it a little bit. Okay, you don't want to go through the full stroke, just partial strokes. And this is going to give you a closer representation of what your bolt lug contact really is. Okay. So now we'll go ahead and take everything out. Okay. And now you're going to, again, you're going to jam as far forward on that bolt as possible. You're going to relieve pressure, rotate it out of battery, and then, okay. So you can see here, you're going to look for the area of the magic marker that's been rubbed off, or the Dicam blue, whatever it is. So this one here has got maybe 20% bolt lug contact on the right hand side, and gosh, I doubt that there's 10% on that particular lug of bolt lug contact. Okay, so there's not a lot of contact here, which means you really want to lap this bolt lug for contact. And the range, some people are comfortable with 40 to 50%. Now, I highly recommend getting this book. It has a lot of specs. I went ahead and highlighted the area that says bolt lug contact. Okay, I went ahead and highlighted the area that said bolt lug contact, and Jerry Kuhnhausen, he likes to have 90 to 95% contact, and 80 to 85 is acceptable for a general rifle, general use rifle. Okay, at the owner's request of this rifle, he wants me to take it to about, he wants at least 50%, but if I can get more, we'll go ahead and get more. Okay. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to keep the same setup here, and you're going to maybe start off with some 600 grit lapping compound and see how much it takes for you to get any material off of that. If it doesn't look like it's working very well, you can step it up to some coarser stuff. Okay. So the last time I did this, what I found out a better way to apply the lapping compound was just get a little metal scale, okay, or maybe a small screwdriver, and put just a little bit on the ruler, okay, and that gives you a chance to just dab. Let's see if I can get it better. It gives you a chance to just dab it right on the spot that you want it, and we're going to just do a little bit of fine lapping here, okay. And again, this time now you don't want to use full strokes. Actually, every time you never want to use full strokes. You only want to use these little, 10th strokes or something like that. So we'll put our lapping tool in there. Get the bolt in. Okay. Push your bolt in real good. And again, we're going to stick that punch in there, or whatever tool it is that you have. Jam it as far forward as you possibly can. Rotate it, and now you've eased pressure. And you notice that as I ease pressure, this lapping compound just kind of squeezed out of there. Okay. Put my magazine in. Okay. So now I'm just gonna, again, just go in real small strokes here, those strokes might actually be a little bit too big. You just want to do it just a little bit. Okay, so sometimes if you think that what happens is the bedding or the lapping compound can break down as you lap it in, and what you can do is just kind of relieve pressure, and that'll wick some of the fresh lapping compound back in there. Okay. And just go ahead and proceed. Again, go ahead and whenever you are removing the bolt, push forward, relieve pressure, rotate it out, and now let it come back. You can bring your bolt back, wipe it off. Okay, so what you're going to see are these shiny spots here on the bolt after you've been lapping it for a little while. Now, that doesn't mean that it's got 100% contact. What that means is your lapping compound is taken off the finish. So if you want to re-verify how much contact you have, you need to remark it and go ahead and go through your contact check again. Okay. Okay, so we've got our bolt in, and again, you know, when you check, you want to really bear down on that. Rotate it without allowing the bolt lug to contact on the way in. Okay. Put that magazine in. Again, you don't have to do this. This is the way that this particular rifle owner wants it done. And we're just going to give it a few rocks back and forth, just gently. Okay. Take our magazine back out. Relieve pressure and rotate it out of battery. Okay. And now we're going to check contact again. Okay. And this side's got a little bit less than it did before when we checked bolt lug contact. When we just drug it up and down, but it's still a lot better than what it was before. Okay, and this one here is about the same. Again, it's got just a little bit less than before. Okay, so now I've got most of my lapping done. I'm just going to go ahead and finish off with some 800 grit lapping compound. And again, I'm just going to go about this the same way I did before. Okay. And just give it a few strokes. A few being like 10 or 20 or something like that. Okay. Go ahead and stick that in, relieve pressure, ease it back, bolt out. Go ahead and clean up the lapping compound from your receiver. Make sure you get it all. Make sure your bolt is clear of all the lapping compound. Go ahead and remark the surfaces of your bolt for a final check. Okay, go ahead and let that dry for a moment. Put your spring back in, case head, bolt. Okay. go ahead and give it a few turns. And again, we have much better bolt lug contact than we did before. Got about 50% on the right, and we're probably sitting somewhere around 85 to 90% on the left. Now that we've measured the bolt differently with little tiny miniature strokes instead of the full strokes like I was doing before, we have a different bolt lug contact indication. And again, from this, the owner of this rifle, this is as far as he wants me to go. So you can see that it's definitely changed. So you don't want to do long strokes from top to bottom. You want to just ease off pressure, or you want to make sure that there's no pressure on the lugs when you rotate it, and you only want pressure when you're actually lapping on those little tiny strokes. Okay, because basically what's going to happen is you have this surface is actually not perfectly. This surface here is actually not a 90-degree angle. This is actually a 0.2-inch lead. Okay, which means this is actually part of the, this is what's called the bolt lug helix, and what this does is it's like a section of a screw thread. Okay, and if this surface were to continue to go all the way around one complete revolution, it would advance 0.2 inches. So this is basically a 5 threads per inch pitch. Okay, and if you if you just keep rotating your bolt with lapping compound, if you keep rotating your bolt with lapping compound through this full stroke, what's going to end up happening is you're going to wear the top surface differently than the bottom, and you're going to actually change the angle of this helix. Okay, so you don't want that. You only want to lap when the bolt lugs are in full contact. Okay, fully locked, and you just want to rotate it just a tad. And what that'll do is that'll preserve the angle of both of these surfaces instead of changing it to something it's not supposed to be. Plus, you're not measuring contact on one point. You're measuring contact over the full surface of the bolt lug engagement. And again, once you've gone back and forth and you've done all these measurements, then you can go ahead and stop whenever you have the desired contact. So after all that lapping, I went ahead and checked the headspace, and it looks like we're running at about 1.633. So it started out more like around 1.6305 or somewhere around there. But it's definitely, the headspace has definitely gone on a bit. So here it is, just shy of fully closed. If I wanted to push it a little bit, it would close. So I would say this is somewhere just shy of 1.633. And when we started out, it was 1.6305-ish, somewhere around there. So after taking off some material from the bolt lugs, our headspace has gone back a little bit. It's been set back. But we have a safer, more accurate round, or a more safer, accurate setup with bolt lug contact. And that's something that he's happy with. So because this was my first time ever doing this, I went ahead and I went very slowly. I could have went with a coarser grit, probably could have got it done a lot quicker, but when you have that much lapping to do, it's going to take a long time. But I suggest doing it a few times and just keep checking for bolt, keep checking the contact, and keep checking the headspace. And before, I had tried to get all these fancy measurements for the left and right bolt lug, but it was just very inconsistent. I couldn't really get a good reading on those, but I think because I had the headspace gauges and I'm able to actually gauge exactly how much material has been taken off, I can determine that a safe amount of steel has been taken off of these lugs. So that is how you can check for and correct bolt lug contact. I also want to thank the owner of the rifle for allowing me to do this. He was very generous in allowing that.